Chapter 3 KGB-grade Russian propaganda. Privacy is just a facade, said the young man who came to one of the Friday night parties I threw at the end of the hall on my floor in the dorm. I don't know whether he was a Russian intelligence officer posing as a student, or if he really was a student who wanted to join Russian intelligence. It didn't matter. We sat on the floor for hours drinking vodka and beer and talked about the spy world. The only difference between Russia and America, he continued, is that in Russia, we know the government spies on us all. In America, you pretend they don't. You have laws which should protect you from spies, but in reality, the American government, just like the Russian government, will not leave things up to chance. They're both going to spy on their own citizens. He leaned in and turned serious. Listen closely and don't forget this. Anything you put on a computer can be spied on by the military, and intelligence agencies can get into your computer and find things you thought you erased. Then he said a warning that I would hear many more times. Everything you post online can be seen by people you don't know exist, and nothing gets deleted from the internet. He told me this just over a decade before Edward Snowden would leak documents proving this to be true. So much information exists out there, he continued. How can the government sift through all of it? Even with computers, the sheer volume takes massive resources to process. Writing does not solely consist of putting ink on paper or letters on a screen. Storing it includes your intention. I thought of the scene in The Master and Margarita, when the devil says he could still find the manuscript even though the master burned it. I saw the connection here to what the student said, and realized this gave me a glimpse into the Russian consciousness, the way they see the world, and by extension, the way in which Russian intelligence saw the world through Russian eyes. He went on. When you think of something of importance, for example, something that could label you a dissident, your thought has power. Your mind will subconsciously seek out other people with these thoughts. You'll cross paths, but you won't know both of you harbor these thoughts. Therefore, censorship and social control through political correctness are so important to the state. When you express these thoughts, you find synergy with others, and a dissident movement can grow, gather power, and eventually seize control from the state. So this is the starting point of control, keeping like minds separate, so to say in English maybe, he said, looking confused as he tried to communicate a Russian thought in English. I used my lesson in language acquisition from the Russian spy stranger, and listened with my heart to understand what he wanted to communicate about the state imposing mind control to keep us separated, and a clear image emerged in my mind. Along with it came understanding beyond mere words. There's no common word in English to say this, as it's not something we talk about often. We don't recognize our own mind control and brainwashing. I wish I could go back and ask him to say his thoughts in Russian, though at the time, I didn't have such a grasp on word roots to understand what he would have said anyway. He paused for a while as if to think of how to advance the conversation further to arrive at the point he wanted to make. The pause suited me well as it gave me time to think about what he said and have my own inner journey within my own mind, recalling my life and conversations I've had, and how I'd felt in my heart what he now put into words. Studies range on this, but people speak around 20,000 words per day, yet we allocate virtually none of that speech to fighting back against the mind control exerted on us. Mind control makes life easy. We don't have to question things or exert energy trying to figure things out. Instead, we chase endless distractions and a life as full of petty luxuries and convenience, as we can only afford to leave little time or energy to focus on the things that could lead us as a people to mass self-actualization and through that reaching utopia or heaven on earth, as I like to call it. Speaking of heaven, it felt like heaven, sitting there in the old Soviet dorm in St. Petersburg, talking about mind control from a Russian perspective. I remember at that time thinking, unfortunately, wrongly, that life from that point on would play out like that I would have these kinds of conversations regularly. I imagined myself back in America, recounting this conversation over beer and wings to a captive audience who would then, in turn, feed into the conversation with their own knowledge that would lead us to a greater understanding of how mind control worked, so that we could devise and disseminate ways to counter it, or in other words, create our own propaganda of mind liberation. Life wouldn't turn out that way. In fact, I have never recounted this story to another person in the 23 years since it happened. Just like most of what I'll write in this chapter, fate would never open a path for me to tell the stories that I write in this chapter. I've tried countless times to share these stories, but they met with blank stares or words like interesting before changing the subject and moving on. I now understand his difficulty in discussing this subject and conveying its full meaning, as I too, even 23 years later, and in my native language, struggle with conveying everything I want to say in a way that can be digested by the reader. People don't tend to bring up psychological warfare as a topic at parties or in casual social settings, and the people who actually study it often keep it secret, either due to the fact that their job requires it, they simply act out of paranoia and don't want to draw attention to themselves, or they, like me, struggle to find a captive audience willing to put in the effort to understand the topic. People certainly don't wear signs saying, "I like discussing mind control." So even if you pass a person with this interest on the street, nothing will alert you to this shared interest. As I've learned from personal experience, your most important thoughts, rather than finding an outlet in face-to-face discussion, find their way to your journal of some kind, be it on paper or digital, the latter of which enables the state to find you without your knowing. Speaking isn't the only way to share thoughts, however, he said, interrupting my internal monologue. When your thoughts leave your head to the paper as you write them down, this creates the intention to be shared, and your thoughts then start to seek out others who attract and share this thought. Intelligence agencies have long studied this phenomenon and have perfected methods to sift through massive amounts of information to find the needles in the haystack, so to say. This sparked a memory from what Natalia Olegovna taught me. "That sounds like the Master and Margarita," I exclaimed. Woolen told the Master that manuscripts don't burn, showing that the idea itself attracted him. The idea was out there, and Woolen said he would find it. Was this a reference to how the NKVD operated under Stalin? I asked, eagerly awaiting his response. "Ha," he laughed. "You've read Master and Margarita," he said, leaving out as the Russian language doesn't have articles and Russians often don't know how to use them correctly. That's very interesting that you made this connection. Americans don't know about that book, but it is very popular in Russia. Bulgakov was a very interesting man, he continued. Yes, of course, this demonstrates what I just told you. Bulgakov had many dissident thoughts, and he struggled with choosing what to write down and how to hide these thoughts, as he was under heavy scrutiny by the censors and the NKVD. His wife, Elena, decided to become a secret source for the NKVD so she could control what they learned about him, and more importantly, what he was writing. It is believed that Bulgakov knew about this, and it was a deal between them. He was certainly brave. He wrote at a time when other critics of the state were arrested or even disappeared altogether. Bulgakov took great care in hiding his work, including hiding it in the toilet. This was a common practice back then. Think of this, had Bulgakov just kept the thoughts in his head and didn't write them down, would the NKVD have searched his apartment? The secret police targets writers because they practice refining thoughts, pondering them over and over again in different words and styles until they become much more powerful when read by another person, and have far more potential to incite others to take subversive action against the state than the average person. Writers have the ability to create and grow movements that can't be controlled or suppressed by the state. I find it interesting how life works. Had I not taken propaganda lessons from Natalia Olegovna, I would not have learned about the Master and Margarita. Had I not brought up the book, I never would have learned this important piece of advice that this person told me next. Life has a building upon itself when you're on the right path. An important lesson to learn from Bulgakov is about the power of intention, he continued. He was able to not only write such a powerful indictment of the absurdity of Soviet bureaucracy under Stalin, but he was also able to complete this book right under the noses of the watchful eyes of the NKVD. They knew he was up to something, but he was able to continue his work because he didn't rock the boat. He intended to keep the work hidden from them, and he carried it out flawlessly. Today, we can look back at his book and learn from it. Bulgakov cloaked himself and put his intention to hide his thoughts from the state above his intention to spread his ideas. For that, they were able to come to fruition, and though it wasn't until decades after his death, his words were able to spread, and you were able to read them. We sat there talking, dancing in the shadows of a forbidden Russian novel that unlocked more hidden knowledge that I would carry throughout my life going forward. I experienced the very reason the state forbids ideas. Ideas build on other ideas. Removing base ideas makes it impossible to build more powerful and effective ideas. This creates the justification for censorship in all its forms, to cut off potentially subversive ideas at the source to stop them from spreading throughout society. He went on, "In the future, the government won't need to search your toilet to comb through your thoughts that you write down. They'll have the capacity to do it remotely through your computer. Everything you type in there exposes your intention, and you must take extra precaution, in the spirit of Bulgakov, to keep your work hidden from the prying eyes of the state, to stay off their radar as much as possible, so they can't interfere with your work." He paused and took the bottle of vodka from me as he looked me in the eyes to gauge how well I followed. He took a gulp of vodka, followed by a larger gulp of beer, as was customary in the dorm. I sat there silent, digesting what he said and understanding the dual nature of what lay ahead. I would try to subvert the powerful to save the nation. However, the powerful would control technology in ways in which I couldn't fathom, to read my thoughts, as we would find out through the revelations of Snowden, even in real time if they wanted, as I typed them onto a screen. I could sit in my room and type out my present thoughts on a computer, and someone, in some secret room somewhere far away, could read my thoughts in real time, and they could do this across several targets simultaneously to see patterns emerge in the consciousness in real time. For the first time in human history, intelligence agencies will have the capability to have their pulse on the evolution and changes in the zeitgeist in real time. You have to understand that technology is advancing more rapidly today than ever in the past. And it will only continue to advance faster and faster, he said, almost seeming to read my mind as to how I already thought about technology. The technology you see today was invented by military intelligence decades ago. As soon as a technology becomes available to the public, intelligence agencies already understand how to exploit it and guide its adoption. They'll sell you tools that claim to hide your identity or protect your data, but these are all facades. In America, it may be illegal to break through these fake security schemes. But in reality, the state will always do whatever it can to protect itself, even if that includes breaking the law, because as long as they are in power, they are the ones who write the laws, and the state never writes laws that criminalize its own corruption or take away from their power over you. As soon as someone comes along to try to rein in the state, they either face insurmountable opposition, and if that doesn't work, they just take them out like JFK, he said, as he put a finger gun to his head and pretended to pull the trigger. This conversation was one of countless such conversations I'd have over the 6 months I studied in Russia. I've had similar conversations in America, but these were deeper and more prescient. St. Petersburg State University, as the alma mater of former KGB officer and now president, Vladimir Putin, was known as a hotbed for intelligence agents, as well as students aspiring to join intelligence. At the time, I had assumed that many of the people I met were simply interested in joining Russian intelligence, like I had been about joining the CIA. It wouldn't be until years later that I realized that at least a handful of those students were actual Russian intelligence operatives delivering to me pure, state-level, actual KGB-grade Russian propaganda, and not the so-called Russian propaganda they like to spout off about in the Western liberal media. The blurred line between official state intelligence and regular civilians engaging in conversations about intelligence became clear when looking back at the next two conversations I will recount in a bit. But first, I'd like to give a little background on Putin and the Russian language and civilization course. One student was talking with me and brought this up. Everyone knows that Putin was KGB, but few know what he actually did. In Dresden, he was tasked with studying and countering the NATO spy network. There he learned about what NATO called war games. They would target university students from several NATO countries and invite them to a seminar at a resort where they would war game situations and watch how the students negotiated between the countries to find a resolution that would unify the NATO countries in decisive actions to counter threats from Russia in the event of war. Each student received a pencil, he said, holding up his hand like he was holding a pencil, with the goal to win over another student who would give them their pencil. The ones with 4 pencils would win and move on to participate in the final negotiations, where they would create innovative strategies, and the players were monitored to decide which positions within NATO to offer them. Putin thought about how to copy this in the Soviet Union, which is why he set up your course. As I would learn years later, after Putin gave an interview talking about his time in Dresden, and after, he and his wife must have devised the plan for my course during his years in Dresden, as she, Ludmila, studied in the philology department or language department, which housed my course. Through Ludmila, Putin could make contacts with trusted professors to design and implement a course to train undercover double agents under the guise of language instruction, with a civilization component that would endear the students to Russia, so that they would have an affinity towards Russia, making them more likely to want to work with Russia rather than against it. Prior to studying in Russia, I had studied at Paris Ivy-la Sorbonne in the French language and civilization course. I would imagine that Putin knew about this course and gleaned some of his ideas from it, but the courses were very different. The civilization part of the French course is presented more tangentially, with the focus on the language, with the goal being to prepare students to be able to study at a French university. I would imagine that the students who studied at the university would be approached by French intelligence with an offer to work with them if they had skills needed by France, while the Russian course leaped at the opportunity to turn and train students in the short 6-month window that they studied in Russia. It's no secret that intelligence agencies use universities as a core part of their operations, ranging in anything from performing research needed for intelligence operations to finding and attracting new recruits. As I wrote this chapter, former CIA officer Mike Benz did a very informative post on the history of the CIA's use of universities for all sorts of purposes, from using music studies to strengthen agency ties with remote tribes around the world to using social science departments to do the research needed to advance psychological warfare. Russian intelligence operates no differently in this regard. The tactics are much different, but the goal is the same. Identify the minds that can help achieve greater success in intelligence missions and drive national interests forward. During his time in Dresden, Putin had the opportunity to study the way NATO used universities to identify and groom future leaders and operate within the massive NATO spy network. At the time, in the midst of the operation, I had no clue how well he had thought out how this program, along with others he openly admits to have designed, would intersect and feed off each other. At my parties, people would just mingle with each other, each having their own conversations, so intelligence officers could easily monitor our interactions and gather primary source intelligence while using the students who participated unwittingly as a source to keep driving intelligence aims towards success. The intelligence officers monitoring and grooming us could just come to the parties on the 12th floor of Corpus 3, the international student dorm, and work their magic. For instance, they could watch my Ukrainian friend, Gleb, who served in the Russian military in the Chechen War, and I teach each other songs on the guitar. I taught him Pearl Jam's Alive, and he taught me a song I still listen to today about war. The song Davai Za, or Cheers 2, tells the story of a unit at war, where they are worn out, looking at the lights of the distant city in the rain, listening to the tanks, seeing the fire of the artillery, and thinking of friends and family at home while getting ready to throw themselves back into battle. I found it to be an extremely powerful form of wartime propaganda that even decades later helped me get through some hard times as I fought battles of my own, alone, and longing to return to the times of playing guitar with Gleb and talking about war stories. Even though Gleb was Ukrainian, he loved Russia and was very patriotic about it. He also loved America and told me over vodka chased with beer how much he enjoyed being able to practice his English with an American and learn about life in America. Gleb didn't always get my sense of humor. His name is one letter off from the Russian word chleb, which means bread. I tried to make a dad joke about his name that involved making fun of the fact that Russians don't have the English H sound, but rather replace it with a G instead. For instance, Russians pronounce hamburger as gamburger. Bread in Russian begins with the Cyrillic X, which is pronounced KH and sounds similar to an H. So I asked him if his name was really Kleb, but Russians can't pronounce the H, so they say G instead. Chances are, you may be just as confused as he was at this point, but the joke was funny to me, given that I was in the process of learning Russian and often chuckled as Russians replaced the H with a G. For instance, one night my Dutch friend Tom and I got back to the dorms 5 minutes after curfew, so we were locked out until 6 a.m., so we decided to walk to the 24-hour internet cafe and play StarCraft and drink beers all night. A thuggish young man walked up to us in the middle of a dark section of town with no buildings around, with an unlit cigarette in his mouth, and just yelled, "Sojigalka," or lighter. Tom said, "Of course," in his friendly Dutch tone and lit his cigarette. The young man, appearing to have been a soldier at one time, knew we were foreigners and yelled, "Giel Gitler." Tom and I looked at each other and wanted to laugh because Giel in German is slang for horny. So what we both understood the young man to say in the mixed Rush phonetic way was, "Horny Hitler." Though it wouldn't be the last time I'd hear this argument from a Russian, Gleb was the first person to explain to me the long history of Russia and America as allies, a history forgotten by the decades of Cold War. Russia and America only ever fought world wars together on the same side, Gleb said one day, then asked, "Why don't Americans like Russia?" I had to think about this for a long time. I knew that I myself wanted to spy on Russia to take it down, but had never articulated why I had that impulse. I thought for a bit before answering. I don't think we hate Russia. We don't even know Russia. I don't remember what I expected to find here, but I never expected the Russian people to be so much like us, just speaking a different language with different customs. We both have big country syndrome, as I called it. Our countries are so big that most people never have to leave, so we have our own developed cultures that immerse us. In Europe, they are greatly influenced by American culture. You hear American music and watch American movies, but in Russia you have your own music here, I said. I said talking to Gleb as if he were Russian and not Ukrainian, but he said multiple times that he didn't care if I called him Russian, as he saw no difference between the two peoples. This mindset was commonplace before the years of Western-instigated animosity leading up to the 2022 war between Russia and Ukraine. I continued, "I think we fear Russia. When I was young, one time we had to get down under our desk to hide from Russian bombs. Duck and cover, they used to say. I think they did this just to scare us. What would a desk do against a bomb?" This conversation prepared me for another conversation I had with a student who told me a detailed history of all the times Russia has helped America since the Revolutionary War, when Catherine the Great assisted America's birth by stopping a British blockade, allowing trade to the nascent country during the war. He listed many things Russians had done for America that they teach in Russia but not in America due to the Cold War. American schools hide how Russia has helped us over the centuries because leaders always need a bad guy, as the student explained. A conversation I had early on that stands out in my memory revolved around the impending face-off between America and the newly reborn Russia. A student made the claim that America would try to start WOT against Russia in the future. Being the typical American, I disagreed and said, "No, you are going to start it." In his convincing Russian manner that I've come to identify as the fingerprints of the overwhelming capacity for influence that flows naturally from a Russian spy, in a few sentences, he totally flipped my view of the world, as the stranger had done on the street. He quickly guided me through the nature and workings of the military-industrial complex, and explained that America profits off war, so the warmongers, who control the media and the content taught to us in school, which had shaped my worldview up until that point, had thoroughly brainwashed me to always blame the other side for the numerous wars America fought and would fight. When it came time to run their psyops on me, the next two stories I'll now tell you, they could tailor their operation specifically to me, my talents, and my personality. The first step in initiating any psychological operation is to plant the seed of the idea in the target's mind with extreme care and tact. No one can fully predict how a psychological operation will play out, so an exorbitant amount of time goes into planning and strategizing how to initiate it. I wasn't given privy to any of the planning involved in creating the psyop that they ran on me. I can only tell you its outcome and how it all played out. I had countless conversations at my parties in the lead up to one particular night where it all came to a head, and they delivered the knockout blow that opened my eyes to the world of covert espionage in the form of what they used to call active measures, but now we simply call psychological operations. And now, for the part you've been waiting for. Buckle up, Buttercup, it's going to be quite the wild ride.